certain fewer priorities that have the highest multiplier effect. Thank you.
Wow. Can we give him some love, guys? Wilbert, thank you. And you've talked about the discipline and our fiscal policies. I'm happy that Joel Mulinda, Principal Economist, Macro Policy Department at the Ministry of Finance, joined us. You'll be joining the panel. So to respond to that, I think Wilbert was focusing there. It would be interesting to hear from you as we continue. Quite interesting conversations that you have put on the table, including, just to summarize what you said, where government needs to focus on multiplier projects, especially manufacturing, finding new markets, concentrating on opening up the Congo market, and diverting resources into ensuring that the commodities get into the Congo market. You talked about tourism and its ability to really bring up more dollars into the market, and the way we communicate Ebola needs to be. I got a friend who called me from Johannesburg, and she was telling me, am I safe? I wanted to come, but I've had an Ebola outbreak. And that indeed will, if you talk to people in the tourism sector, they will tell you they've had so many cancellations just with the outbreak of Ebola alone. So let's see how we communicate that better. Talked about investing in digital financial systems, and also expenditure discipline and supporting BOU to create a conducive investment climate, as well as also the banking sector, how it should respond to the reduction in borrowing, and also the fact that people have accumulated huge interests on debt post-COVID. So interesting conversations. Thank you very much. And you hinted about less payee. We're having a man who was in URA before he became a member of parliament for Shema municipality. Fortunately, he also sits on the budget committee, the Honorable Kateshumbwa Dixon. You've had it from the bankers, you've had it from the central bank, and of course we've had our revenue shortfalls, about 2.2 trillion shillings, according to the presentation that was made for the financial year 2021. I wanted to hear from you. You sit in a privileged seat as a legislator, as someone who chairs who is a member of the budget committee, but also a former member of the Uganda Revenue Authority, and therefore you understand how revenue collection plays in clearly. It's tough because just this week we've had the Poultry Association of Uganda crying that URA has introduced 10% duty tax and 18% of VAT. That is over the 6% withholding fee on all poultry feeds coming into the country and concentrates. They're still fighting. They have captured the attention of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Agriculture to remove that tax. I got a feeling when I heard that URA is really struggling to look for money because of the targets. What can we do? You've heard it from the measures from the central bank and what Wilbert was saying. From your position, what can we do to get out of this? And also, how do we play that delicate balance of revenue collection versus struggling businesses in a very terrible economy as it looks like? Katesh, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Solomon, and CSBAG, and the colleagues who are here. I'll speak like someone who has been in the boardroom making decisions, but at the same time, I am on the ground as a politician, and I represent the people. That is that perhaps would be the difference between what I will talk about and people who sit in the boardroom. I think, for me, we have failed to get the balance that is needed. If you have a budget deficit as a country, what does it mean for the person who is struggling to survive? First of all, the budget discipline means that government definitely has to look at the consumption. You cannot continue having the appetite high when you actually don't have the what? When you have a budget discipline, deficit. But what we are seeing is that we are living as if, things are okay. I know my colleagues in the ministry are soon coming up with a supplementary, So you have a deficit, but your appetite for expenditure is what? Is growing. Beyond the appropriation, you have a supplementary bill coming within the first 6 months. So the question is, are we having the balance? How far can you go on fighting the imported inflation? I think Wilbrod has hinted about it. I know BOU is doing their job, but how far can you chase this inflation? You know that the fuel is a big driver. You are not going to stop the demand for fuel. You are not going to stop the flow of fuel, but you have no control about its price. And during the times of high inflation, the biggest people who actually suffer are the common man that we represent. So when you go down on the ground, this is what is happening. People don't have money. People are borrowing amongst themselves for consumptive spending. What most of us don't know is that when you go in the countryside, like in some of our constituencies, people have come up with their own solutions, saving schemes at the village level. But when I took interest to find out what are these people doing, they are saving little money per month. It is actually outside your your jurisdiction. You don't know what is happening as bankers, and it's a lot of money. But what happens? We are here crying over interest rates, but people in the villages are actually bleeding. They are actually borrowing at 48, 50%. Yes, and borrowing for consumptive spending. Basically, they are saving for consumption, not investment. So you have these village saving schemes where someone goes and borrows 150,000 to be paid in 6 months and is required to pay 3,000 per week. He has a need of 150 to go to a hospital, to pay fees. So he borrows and pays 300,000 per week for 6 months. So after 6 months, he has paid about 70-something thousand, which translates to 48% interest rate. So I think I agree with Wilbrod. As we try to tighten the monetary policy, we must look at the fiscal policies. Where I sit as a member of parliament, I feel that government is in a catch-22 situation, but they must be able to balance. You don't want money into saturation, but you have people who have supplied government. You have a lot of areas. They have borrowed money from Wilbrod at a very high rate. You say you don't want to pay them because you don't want money in circulation. The bankers are knocking on their doors. The taxman is knocking on their door because he has issued an invoice. And then you increase the CBR rate, and the bankers increase, and the burden continues. So basically, the businesses get hurt. At the same time, where I sit, I feel that government needs to do more investment in productive activities. Because if you have a budget deficit, how are you going to cover it? You can only cover it through either more borrowing, but we have reached the threshold, or increased revenue performance. Revenue performance comes from increased economic activity. If there is no economic activity, there is no tax. And increased economic activity without sufficient demand is also a problem, because if the villager cannot consume soda, cannot take a beer because he has no money, it doesn't matter whether you have increased production of beer as a manufacturer. You will not have the what? The indirect tax. So ultimately, it is a catch-22 situation. You cannot celebrate bringing down inflation with all the methods at the expense, while failing to get the balance of growth, especially development, because that leads into the much needed, increased economic activity that will enable you a tax, and then you reduce on the what? On the deficit. So we feel that PDM, for example, the parish development model, we allocated about trillion, 100 million per parish. That is direct money that would go into productive agriculture, because Wilbur talked about, us increasing access to the market, turning the cargo planes into, the planes into cargo. The goods are you going to take? We are saying we want to raise people from subsistence into commercial agriculture. The moment you have more eggs produced, then you have more cargo to do what? To take. But if you have not implemented the parish model to stimulate that production across the board, to have people take advantage of the rain, so that there is more growth, more crop production. We have seen across the border, government is coming in to give subsidies like for fertilizers to boost production. The moment you don't have a mass production stimulated across the country in our competitive advantage, which is agriculture, then you have nothing to export. And all that goes back to the economic activity that needs to be taxed. So we feel, even as much as we try to control inflation, we should not lose the balance. We must be able to release money for production. PDM needs to be implemented. We must be able to take care of our infrastructure. In that parliament, the biggest outcry in the last couple of days is the damaged road network. So you have people in West Nile, the roads going to the border are impassable. So even as much as you want to, cross your cargo across, you can't. And so you cannot have UNRWA and the road fund not dealing with the road while expecting that production will get into the market. So that's where we think that there is need for that balance. Again, I think finally, back to the rains. You see, on one side they are creating the havoc that we are not dealing with. On the other side, it is an opportunity. Okay? But the opportunity is finding us unprepared. So I was in Shema over the weekend discussing with the parish development committees. And they challenged me. They said, Honorable, you have come. We waited for parish model since last year. Rains are ending. You want to release money when the rains have ended. What do you expect? So the rains which are creating havoc that we are not dealing with in terms of infrastructure are an opportunity that we have not prepared for. You see the balance. And finally, the aspect of expenditure on social services. Even as we control inflation, the social services, which are largely private in this country, health, education, must make sure that the expenditure is taken care of. Because when you have people without money, borrowing for consumption, not savings, they will run to the health center. And if the health center is not able to take care of them, they will go to borrow to go and access a private medical facility. And the situation continues. So I feel that as much as we have succeeded in taming this inflation, we may not it should not, the question will be, how far can we go to tame this imported inflation? How far can we continue chasing it? And like Wilbrod has mentioned, we have to look at the structure of our economy. We cite examples of US, UK, but we must look at our economy. Where is the middle class we are talking about? Okay? So let us achieve the twin objective. Control inflation, but not at the expense of growth significantly, because it will deep us, it will take us deeper. The moment growth continues at lower, it will take us much deeper. But at the same time, government must tame the appetite. What are we spending on? Even as we are controlling, we must look at the budget that we appropriated. We are waiting anxiously for the supplementary to see the priorities of government at this time and where the source will be, because we expect, if you need a supplementary, you must be able to tell us where do you expect to get the money. And at that point, I also think that we will become victims of our own measures. Because when you increase the CBR rate, okay, Wilbrod increases the lending rate, and then government goes to Wilbrod to borrow, they will pay at the higher. They will suffer the same effects. But for me, who is competing with government, my effects will be much higher. And I think we must also reduce on domestic borrowing to make sure that there is, government doesn't compete so much with the private sector.
Thank you.
That's what I want to say, and I will beg that since the fiscal man has come, I will take leave shortly because the session of Parliament has started early today, and I need to get in the House to make more contributions. Thank you very much.
Honorable Kateshumba, thank you very much for your time. We will give you the opportunity to leave. Thank you. You concluded on a very interesting note of reducing government borrowing. And we've all had it like a song, it crowds out the private sector. But what do you expect Wilbrod to do? Because government wants money, and he has money, and the risk is high for people who have been borrowing because they have accumulated interest rates. He will give money to government because he feels he's more secure with money from government. And therefore, the interest rate even rises more because of the risks involved with the normal borrowers. So I think that is also important. I love the aspect of what are we spending on, including the 2.6 billion cars for the speaker and the deputy speaker. Goodness, that was crazy. But let's continue with the conversation. Let me bring in Richard Tugume here. Richard, you really in charge of innovation and research at the Uganda Agribusiness Alliance. And you bring in, you're now from that position of we are the the people who are affected most. What have you felt from your people in the agribusiness sector? And largely because everyone is focusing on working with agribusiness, improving our agriculture sector so that, we can use it as an avenue to reduce inflation. What has been your experience, and what would you advise in the long and medium term to manage the situation at hand?
Thank you, Solomon. Quickly, I want to introduce the subject of Uganda Agribusiness Alliance. We are an umbrella body that hosts both national and international stakeholders in agribusiness, with the sole objective of creating the most conducive environment possible for the sector to thrive and achieve maximum potential. In summary, that's who we are. And in my submission today in regards to what the UA is doing and how we are feeling these effects, I'm going to submit from the perspective of what I do on a daily basis in terms of my profession. Because at the UAA, I'm a board member, and that's not my full-time work, but I am accredited to the UAA because of my actual full-time work. And that will give the perspective as to which angle I am bringing this discussion. So my full-time work is I am a fund manager of 3 foreign funds. One based out of the state of New Jersey called the Seagull Family Foundation. And that one is lending at levels between $10,000 to $100,000 to SMEs in the region. We operate in about 7 countries in the region. The second fund is called Yunus Social Business Foundation. It was founded by the gentleman called Muhammad Yunus, Nobel Peace Prize winner of 2006. And we are lending at between $150,000 and $500,000 USD to SMEs. And the third fund is called the Global Social Impact Investment Fund, based out of Madrid in Spain, that is lending between $500,000 and $1.5 million per SME in the wider region. Now, from where I sit, my problem with these policies that have been elaborated very clearly today is that principally when you hear comments about our economy is not like the UK, it is not like the US economy, the challenge with these policies is that these are not historically founded in our setting and realities. These policies were not designed with Uganda's economy in mind. When the framers of these policies were framing them, Uganda was not anything they understood or even considered in the first place. And that's why you hear, when you hear the middle class in the UK or the bankable portion in the UK is 90% plus, that is what they were designed for, which we are not. So my problem is that our elite class and policy framers have not done sufficient Ugandanizing of these policies to make them realistic for our context. That is where I'm having the problem. And I'm seeing it on the front lines of it, in the trenches of it. And I'll give an example. In these policies that I also studied in depth right from A-level, they will tell you in these economies that there are 4 factors of production, 4 traditional factors of production, as an example. And they'll tell you it is land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. I'll tell you that in the economy called Uganda, at the state in which we are operating, there is a 5th and important factor of production that is not in this literature. And you know what it is? It's a factor called dishonesty. Literally. When in the journalism stories you keep raising about investigative journalism, and then you say there's this whole thing about adulteration of our products and things that are manufactured. That is a factor of production. You know, there's an entire value chain, there's an entire industry that has come to believe that every product cannot be taken to market in an ethical manner, both in quality and quantity. So your bag of cement that is meant to be 50 kilograms will be about 45 at best. It will have some ash in it at some times. You know, your kilo of meat can never be 1 kilo, it will be 850 grams. That is a factor of production. It was never in this consideration here. In these policies, when they were being done by the famous economists in all those developed economies, they were never a factor. They are a factor in this country. So as just one example, I'll tell you that now coming to the realities of how this is affecting the real groundwork in this economy, is that when you pass a policy like this, without that 5th factor of production in Uganda is considered, what we are seeing on the front lines is that the rate of willful default that is deliberate by the borrower has increased. Why? Because now there's an excuse to default. When there was no excuse of saying, oh, the economy is very harsh, oh, people are not doing well, the guy who could not give that excuse was forced to comply, right? But now, because there is excuse, now he has a good reason to say, oh, but things are not working. You actually know, we're just out of COVID. Now even Ebola has come. You know, the war in Russia is going on. The bullets are still flying, so he can't pay you, even when he should be able to pay you. That is in our economic fabric here. So those realities for me are the problem, the Ugandanizing of the aspect. I'll give you another example. In as much as we talk about challenges like a lack of sufficient capital in the economy to lend out, a lack of employment for our youthful population, which is one of the highest in the world. There are challenges like unlendability. The borrower that is claiming there is no money to lend, or to borrow, rather, how lendable are you? What value system do you espouse to qualify for that lending? That's a big question, big challenge in this country. Number two, on employment. How many people in this country are actually unemployable, even when he's given a job? That he does not have the discipline, he does not have the values, he does not have the work ethic for him to perform on that job. Those are the things in our economy that are not relevant from where these things are coming from, because they have since been solved a long time ago. So for me, I think that's where the problem is. I'll give you another example as well. Look at how we are copying and pasting some of these innovations coming out of the Western economies, like these online applications. Uber is a good example. I'm sure any of you in this room that has tried using the Uber app or service in this country, one of the most fascinating things is that when you apply for a ride and then they allocate you a driver, the first thing you get is a telephone call, having recognized that is your number. The driver will call you up and say, hey boss, where are you? Number two, where are you going? And you're wondering, but the app should have solved those problems for me. And so if I can wonder as a Ugandan, what about the foreigner who is used to how the Uber is working in the UK and is having those questions here? So for me, that is where the gaps are. We need to Ugandanize these things so that they can speak to the realities of our economy. And now talking about the actual substantive solutions, I'll leave one big question out for debate. If the argument, the principal argument for these policies is price stability, between a rock and a hard place and making two hard choices, which one is better? Between having a stable price with a population that has no money to even buy anything or most of the things at that stable price, or having an inflationary situation to some extent, but with some money in the pocket, at least to buy something at those inflated prices. Those are the sobering questions that would Ugandanize this debate and make it relevant for our economy. Thank you.
Interesting. Some love for Richard. Need I add anything, sir? I don't think so. Ugandalizing the fiscal and monetary policies to actually to fit our economic situation. Thank you very much, Richard. Joel, I'm told you can't come and sit, but maybe I'll give you my shortly. Let me just get a reaction from Julius. Interesting conversations here, Julius. You presented the paper from CSBAG. You've had it realistically, what's happening on the ground. Are the policies working, and what can we do in the short and medium term? As an economist, as a person who is observing this from the outside, what can we do to make these things work? Julius.
Thank you so much. I think thanks, Jimmy from Bank of Uganda. I think for me is those are the kind of assurances we are looking out for. And I think for me it's very important. But most importantly is also the tone and the change of language. 5 years down the road, that would not be the tone. That actually we are doing this, but we understand there will be some consequences and some costs about it. And I think this is very important that when we are making these policies, we know there are costs that are likely to be involved.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Honorable Katishima was coming in. Then what would be the balance? I mean, I agree, inflation is bad. It's cancer. And the Bank of Uganda is very strict. The moment it raises just a head a bit, they just bring Katusha and just want to wipe it out completely. But I think we need to understand the cost. I think that's very important. We need to quantify this cost. how much is it costing us in terms of employment, in terms of the growth itself, in terms of the worries that Wilbur is telling us. I mean, people who are likely not to pay, so that we know, is this cost worth it, that to bring this hammer on this mosquito that is coming up, because we fear that the mosquito might turn up into a monster at a later date. So we need to really quantify and understand this cost properly, and then we see how to deal with it. I think the other point also important that is coming up is terms of balancing itself. I really have a very strong belief that this country, we just don't lack money. I think our problem is how we utilize it. And a classic example is really to say that, yes, we need to coordinate between fiscal and the monetary policy. It never used to be there. It's now very strong. But if you have an expectation of a particular growth or an expectation of particular variables to increase, where are we putting our money? I think that's very critical. That can spark growth very quickly. That can cushion us not to die, because it doesn't make sense that we so much love inflation, but then we lose lives. It just doesn't make sense. Where should we put money to ensure that it doesn't affect the monetary part, but it can help us grow? Because if UNRA, for example, we tell UNRA, please, no more constructing new roads, but let us beef your budget on operation and maintenance. So those bridges that are collapsing, you can fix them. That's very important. The roads that are impassable, you can patch them back again, so that there can be new traffic. But new roads, we can put them on hold. To also say, yes, it is a planting season. Let's get ready. Let's ensure that our farmers have the right fertilizers, they have the right education, they have the right seedlings, and so that they are prepared to grow, because that definitely will help the monetary part, because partly the food inflation feeds into our overall inflation that we are talking about, so that we have production and then inflation comes back very, very, very quickly. So on the side of fiscal, I think that is something that we really need to look at and say, it's just not a blanket of cutting down all the expenditures, but also on targeting those areas where we can quickly get returns. My last take on this, a question to Bank of Uganda. I think I want you to come back to it, Jimmy, because I think one of the questions also talked about, and something I've been thinking about also, is this is imported inflation, isn't it? Majorly, fuel disruption in supplies, so we have less coming in. I mean, how much will the monetary policy improve on the quantity of goods and services that will come into the country? That is something I just wanted to know how it's going to feed into that, because it is something we have no control over. Here, yes, I understand. We can tell people, please, instead of having more beans on your table, having more meat, reduce on these expenditures because things are getting more expensive. People might be able to control their expenditure domestically. But for goods and services, fuel, which is coming from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, we have supply chains that we know. The cooking oil we are talking about, we know the Indonesians during COVID, they stopped, harvesting it. How is this really going to help us improve on this imported inflation? I think it would be better that you could clarify to us, and then we can be able to move back. But thanks so much, Salmon.
Internal measures to manage imported inflation.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Jimmy will speak to that as we continue. Julius, thank you. Joel, I thought I would bring you here to sort of answer to the fiscal aspect of it. Katesh said that you will be presenting a supplementary budget very soon on the floor of the House. But we've talked about taming our expenditures, clearly paying of arrears that government has to bring money into people's pockets. And I wanted you to come here and speak to the fiscal policy and how that feeds into managing the entire economic challenges that we're going through. For those that don't know Joel is from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. Joel is the principal economist, Macroeconomics Policy Department at the Ministry of Finance. Joel, you're very welcome.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. When I came in, I chose not to sit up there, since that is very high level. I wanted to be on the ground with the, so that you don't say that, anyway, jokes aside. I think relating to the paper, first of all, let me send apologies from my permanent secretary, who would have loved to be here. I know you know he likes these engagements, but he's held up in quite some important meetings. So I'm now torn between referring to the paper, but also answering some of the critical questions that have come up. That's what happens when you are the last one to present. But I will, since I am from the Macroeconomic Policy Department, I'll first give a brief macro kind of analysis as to why government is strongly committed to supporting monetary policy in this critical time. And then I'll respond to some of the other critical issues that have come up. First of all, Uganda's economy has been a very resilient economy, specifically because we have come from a pandemic and we have gone to other shocks, and there's a high level of uncertainty. Last year, we grew by 4.6, and this year we estimate to grow by above 5%, at about 5.3% of GDP. We initially thought we would grow at about 6%, but we are seeing some risks, weaker demand, supply constraints, and some of the climate change issues that we are seeing where we're having the droughts. So we have revised that number. Nonetheless, 5% in this critical time is still strong economic growth. Now, let me talk about this inflation. I think some of my fellow panelists who have been up here have maybe touched lightly on the issue. But as my permanent secretary usually says, that inflation is a cancer. I don't know if you watched the recent interview. And you have to deal with cancer very, very decisively. Let me give you some facts. In the 12 months heading to end of 2021, over 50% of the advanced economies had their inflation above 5%. This has not happened in the last 2 decades. Let me give you some more information. Of the emerging and developing countries, over 72% in the 12 months ending 21 have had their inflation growing above 5%. Half of those countries did not have their inflation growing above 5%. Now, I want that to sink in. This is something that has not happened in recent times. And there is still a high level of uncertainty on these prices. Actually, we can sit here and argue about what is causing this inflation. But there is no, let me say, definitive point that this is where the inflation is coming from. In the advanced economies, where they had significant stimulus packages, where the governments were putting money in the economy, there was a demand pool, right? Because there was supply disruptions, but people had money, but the goods were few, right? That was in the advanced economies. In the emerging and developing countries, it's a different scenario, where we've had higher commodity prices, and then we have also had food price issues. Okay? So the conditions are a bit different. But what is clear, almost all central banks right now are tightening monetary policy. But now let me come to the emerging and developing countries, where Uganda is in that category. For the advanced economies, they only spend about 27% of their incomes on food. In the emerging and developing countries, we spend about close to 78% of our incomes on food. Now, I'm going to introduce a new concept, because I don't want you to leave here without learning something new. Something called inflation inequality. And I think my colleague from Bank of Uganda was trying to explain why this inflation is dangerous, because it can persist. So let me make a basic assumption. Let us assume that the people largely dwelling in urban centers are the maybe middle income or high class or high income people. And then those in the rural are the lower income people, right? And according to the recent household survey, in rural areas, about 50% or more than 50% of the income is spent on food. And in the urban areas, about 30% is spent on food. So this is how you calculate inflation inequality, and this is what it means. You have 0.5, which would be your 50%. You take away 0.3, which would be your 30%. You end up with 0.2, which is your 20%. The current inflation for food is close to about 20%. It's about 18%. You multiply that by another 0.2, then you get 4%. What does that mean? It means that you in the urban centers, if inflation is 20%, right? The person in the rural area is experiencing an inflation inequality of 4% more than you. To put that in context, if the high income and the low income were all spending the same, if let's say we're spending 50 and 50%, no matter how far the inflation goes, the inequality would not be there, would all be suffering the same. But largely the vulnerable and the poor are experiencing inflation more, much more than maybe people in the middle class and a bit of a higher income. So what does this mean? This means that this inflation has the capability of persisting. It will get ingrained into the behaviors and the expectations. And that's why you see some situations where you are having fuel at 3,600 maybe 2 years ago, but even when the inflation subsides, it will not go back to that level. It will not go back to that level. This is what in some areas we tag as inflation inequality. It persists because the poorer people will have to use more of their income on food and basic utilities, and this will impact on everything, on the healthcare, on education, and this makes people more and more poor. So, even with our development partners that we have been discussing with, the World Bank and the IMF, the message is clear. You have to tighten now, not tomorrow. You have to tighten now. I know the debate, the issue is maybe the speed of tightening, but the risk of allowing, so we've had the supply induced inflation, right? But there could be secondary, and we're already seeing the secondary impacts from the exchange rate, how the currency is moving. We are seeing import demand going up, both from government and the private sector. These secondary impacts are the dangerous ones. And this can cause a vicious cycle where we have inflation moving to a scenario where it becomes almost, the value of money is actually completely eroded. Okay, so on that point, where do we focus now on the fiscal side? First of all, is to coordinate and harmonize with the monetary authorities to make sure that we have a prudently managed economy. But from our side, is to build the capacity, the productive capacity of the economy, while, considering social protection. To that effect, I know many of the panelists have talked about some of the programs, like the Parish Development Model, and the MYOGA and the Small Business Recovery Fund, and all the affordable access that is coming through the UDB and UDC. But let me give a few. This financial year, the budget for arrears was over 600 billion. In the first quarter of this financial year, that money was cleared. This is showing government commitment towards alleviating the conditions. For the parish development model, about 40% of the local governments that would be eligible for these funds have submitted all the criteria and will be eligible for the disbursement. This quarter alone, 81 billion was disbursed to the parish revolving fund. And of that, in this quarter, 25 million was sent and paid. Next quarter, 50 million will be paid. And in the third quarter, 25 million will be paid. For the Small Business Recovery Fund, I was actually reading a report on this, and my colleague from... we are trying to work with the central bank and the commercial banks to see how this money can be taken up, because these are affordable rates, 10 to 12%, but the uptake is quite low with some of the challenges that he has mentioned. But government has been putting and committing to put money in these areas. In the Imyoga, last year, 100 billion was spent. This quarter, 22 billion has been spent on the Imyoga. And many of the other affordable avenues for credit. From the URS side, this financial year, there were no new tax changes or no new measures to ensure that people can recover from the pandemic. I think I had some issues on the poultry, but I think that was on value addition. And if this is exported, these people can be able to reclaim that VAT. And right now we are having a program with the IMF where we are looking at having, our tax policy and administration to make sure that this becomes more fair and more equitable. We are looking at the exemptions, we are looking at the tax savings. So government is not sitting back on the fiscal side. And for many of the people who have been talking about the mix, I think quarter two, I don't want to preempt, but when my PSST is talking about the quarter two release, you'll see a big difference from what has happened in quarter one, especially on the development side, which should help to alleviate some of the concerns that we are constraining the productive side of the economy, especially on some of the road developments and all that. You will be able to see that I can't preempt discussions when my boss has not yet talked about them. On the climate change is a big issue now. We have just set up a climate unit in the Ministry of Finance to coordinate the access of green financing. And we are also doing much more in terms of modeling for policy on the effects of climate change, on the effects of the economic activity, on the environment. We are taking this very seriously. And I think we should, as Ugandans, also play our part in this issue. It's not just a government issue. When we're looking at some of the figures, they are quite worrying. So we should, as Ugandans, support the government in this. For the revenues, I saw some alarming figures, which are true, and that had to do with the pandemic. Thank you for presenting some of those alarming figures. But you can also give the positive side. Last year, the deficit was only 500 billion. And this year, in this quarter, we are already making some surpluses. So I think next time when you're making a presentation, you can, since you had an outlook, you can also put some of the positive areas. Exports are also doing well right now. We're expanding into the regional markets, South Sudan and Congo. And we must be cognizant of the fact that for Uganda to survive, we really need to have access to these markets. And once we have this productive capacity on board, where are all these products going to go? For the domestic borrowing, this has been a hot topic this quarter, but we are mindful of what is happening in the economy. And this quarter, if I'm correct. We have not borrowed to finance the budget. We have not. From the domestic side, we have not. Whatever activity you are seeing is part of refinancing existing debt. It is not that government has borrowed for fiscal purposes. So that means that in as much as the economy is feeling the pinch, so is government. That's why we are considering where we put these limited resources, but we are also considering the private sector and not aiming to crowd them out. And over the medium term, we want to bring this down, this borrowing, to below 2% of GDP, and hopefully targeting down to 1%. We are mindful of the limited fiscal space, but we are still within our guidelines for the Fiscal Charter of Responsibility. We have not breached those guidelines, and we're still on track even with our IMF program. Some challenges here and there, but largely this fiscal consolidation is being done in a prudent manner, and it's targeting the areas that can support the economy without leading to that heating of the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't need that heating of the economy right now. It may sound like something like we can joke about, but we have seen what has happened when we have had inflation in this country not so far ago, when I think 2012, and just before that, and even in the 70s. That kind of inflation can lead to detrimental things. I don't want to mention some of those things here. But we call on the people to be patient. This financial year, we have 4 quarters. We shall try to prudently manage, first of all, the mobilization of resources, and then these expenditures to make sure that we stick in line with the budget strategy of enhancing productivity, infrastructure, and human capital development, while not, adding to the heating of the economy. We'll continue to support the monetary policy, but we are cognizant of the fact that there needs to be economic growth. And I'm sure this will be reflected in the Q2 release, which will be presented by my Permanent Secretary in a couple of days. Yes, I think I've tried to, This one is on a personal note. I am from the Macroeconomic Policy Department, and I had the modeling and forecasting section. When I was reading this paper, there was a part that strongly condemned the Ministry of Finance, saying that, and I quote, let me see where it is. I need to read this one out. We challenge Ministry of Finance present for discussion with key stakeholders the simulations from the Integrated Macroeconomic Model and the CGE models related to the impact on policy proposals. Currently, as shown in the last PFR assessment report for 2016, there is no evidence that GOU undertakes and publishes the impact of key policies. First of all, I think that was a very strong statement, and it should not have been in this paper. Largely, don't only focus on Ministry of Finance. For you to say that the whole of GOU is taking policy decisions without informed or evidence-based research is quite distortionary. Secondly, the Integrated Macroeconomic Model, which you have mentioned here, which is a hot topic in this country, was launched in 2017. To that effect, it has been used in the National Development Plan. It was also used and mentioned by His Excellency when they were considering, when there were proposals to have some kind of tax subsidies when the fuel was going up. And it showed that the economic benefits were way below the tax losses, and it would not have been beneficial to the economy. And this was mentioned by His Excellency. And there are many, quite many other, which I'll be able to share with you on this. Our PSST is very critical on this issue. He makes policies and decisions based on evidence and evidence-based research. So I just wanted to clarify on that one, just so that we don't have this one out there. Okay, thank you.
Joe, thank you very much. I've listened to you. Thank you very much, very quite closely. You've released already money for the parish development model. Did you say about 81 billion, right? For the first quarter. It would be interesting for you before you release the second quarter to look at whether that money has indeed translated into investment, you know, or it just got lost along the way, and whether it has had an impact on the economy. I know that you've said you'll be releasing about 25 billion in the second quarter, and you have such hopes. 25 million per parish. Oh, okay. Thanks for that clarification. So there's really a lot of hope, Julius, in the parish development model. I want to be a bit optimistic with you on this, and I know that I've been accused for not believing in some of government programs, but I want to believe in that. But the reason why I have that is because when you looked at the Myoga model that government was financing, and take a deep dive in whether it did what it was supposed to do, you'll be surprised on what you find on ground. Well, it's your time to talk back. You've heard it from the experts. You've heard it from the people. It's time for you to give your views and thoughts on the conversation. You can raise your hand, put up your question or comment, and my panel will be able to speak to that. And I can promise you that in the next 40 minutes, I will be closing this conversation today. A couple of them coming through from Zoom audience. I wanted to read some of them as I get you the opportunity to ask your questions. Someone called Enoch Trinoboro has said that since April 2022, a shilling has lost nearly 400 shillings. Seeing our external debt is about $13 billion, suggests an additional increase in debt in Ugandan shillings due to the shilling change, which is 400 shillings. And that's about 13 billion shillings, which goes to about 5.2 trillion. This approximately is 15 to 20% of domestic revenue. And I think they wanted the central bank to comment on that. Hopefully you can say a word or two. Any questions, comments? You can raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. Someone help me move the microphone, please. You're very welcome to give your views and comments, and you can introduce yourself. After which we'll have a round from my panel, and then we can have this closed.
Thank you so much, moderator. Mildred Barungi are my names. I'm the manager in charge of research, monitoring, and evaluation at the Uganda Development Corporation, UDC. I'm here representing the executive director. I've enjoyed this discussion very much, and I very much want to agree with the presenters and the panelists, especially with the ED UBA when he said we need to focus on finding new markets for our products. This is very key, and we have experienced it at UDC in some of our investments. I should have mentioned that some of the things we do at UDC is support the private sector to set up factories, manufacture products, either for domestic consumption or for export. The intention is really to utilize the available local raw materials, create jobs, and be able to reduce also the trade deficit, which we've indicated is a challenge here. But some of our investments, I'll give a case in point, is a one factory in Luka. It's called Mutuma Commercial Agencies Limited. It processes cotton into very fine cotton wool. But for a very long time, they failed to get market for the cotton wool. Reason being they cannot compete with cheap cotton wool that is coming in from outside. And they failed to break into the regional markets. So the issue of really breaking into the available regional markets to have access to our value-added products is something that government needs to take on very, very seriously. And I know organizations like the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda have been trying to do that. They need to do more. and maybe more aggressively. The other that I wanted to again emphasize was there was a mention that yes, BOU is doing its job to stabilize prices, but it should not come at the expense of, it should have a human face. The economy should continue to grow. People should be well. We should see the economy transforming structurally. We cannot continue, all of us, depending on agriculture with all the challenges that it faces. So what I see in this is a huge focus. We should focus on new areas of value addition. For a long time, we've been focusing on agro-industries. If you look around, it is the tea factories, it is cassava processing, it is, you know, it is sugarcane. We need to move beyond agro-industries. We are not saying we abandon, but we explore into new areas. We are all aware we have a lot of natural resources, abundant iron ore in Cabuye. It cannot be disputed. We have limestone and marble in Karamoja sub-region, but there are still some challenges in terms of financing, finding the right partners to take such projects forward. So such efforts, we need government to heavily commit to support their being executed, because they will definitely close the trade deficit. We are going to stop importing so much of what we can locally produce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Interesting views there. I'm sure that the team here will speak to that. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Since I'm near let me use this opportunity. Thank you. My name is Peter Babienda from Policy Research Institute. Yes, following what she has said and the panelists, on the interventions, especially on the fiscal side, and given the, when you're talking about inflation, some of the inflation which is biting now is the food inflation, which we have talked about. And the food inflation has largely been caused by the drought, which affected our agricultural products that farmers did not get, like maize. Most maize dried in the garden. But we are doing less in terms of mitigating that, yet it is predictable. So I would believe that, especially from the physical side, we should put a lot of money in stabilizing agricultural production. When we look at equipment for irrigation are very costly. A pump is very costly, yet these crops just need the water. And that one already is going to affect our exports, because we export largely the agricultural products. Our maize exports are going to reduce because we don't have, even right now in the country, you can see the prices for maize are very high. Beans, 5,000 now. So these ones are some of the things we should take advantage of. After all, only 3 months you will have already received results. So the climate interventions, we need to put more there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would love us to pay attention to the budget expenditure on climate change. Sorry, I'm speaking as an investigative journalist. I would love to know what the Minister of Finance, what the money they have allocated to climate change for this year's budget. I mean, we all remember that we're allocating, I don't know how much money, but it was, Joel, how much money did we put for climate change interventions? Thanks. We put a significant amount of money and they clustered it around climate change. It would really be interesting to look at the expenditure of that money. Where is it going? Is it, and by climate change, what do you mean? You know, are you going into massive afforestation? Are you going into carbon trading? What is the money going to do? And how much is it going into, you know, payment of salaries and all that? You know, but that's for us as journalists to do, so that we really go to the tiniest bit of it to look at that. Questions? Yes, ma'am. I also want to recognize the presence of the country director of Oxfam, Francis Odokorach, thank you for being with us. Yes, yes, sir. You already have the mic. Sorry, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Solomon, and the panelists. My name is Francis Cabuye from the Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises. First of all, I want to thank Sophie and the colleagues at CSBAG for putting together this report. And looking at some of the implications that have been mentioned in the report, I think there is one key implication that maybe was left out and yet it ought to be included. And that's the socio-economic implication of security. A lot of what we are talking about here, the situation that our country or the economy is in right now, has created ground for insecurity. Some of you have seen maybe on WhatsApp, on the internet and Facebook, some videos of daytime robberies, people running into a shop with guns and stealing money. And actually, I remember at one time the PSST talked about a situation where currently the poor are not sleeping and also the rich are not sleeping because the poor are awake at night. So that's a security issue that needs to be put into consideration as an implication. And also at one time the president, during one of his most recent addresses to the nation, he decried the increasing level of insecurity in the country. I believe this should be connected. It has a connection to the current situation, the economic situation. And secondly, sometimes I wonder whether there is synergy between government MDAs. Because, for instance, at such a time when all the stakeholders, both government and the private sector, are sitting in boardrooms to discuss or to forge a way forward on how to improve the economy, it should not be the right time for instance, for some of the policies that are being implemented to be implemented. For instance, I'll give you a case study of Kampala, where we have the smart city. This smart city policy, of course, it's a good policy, but the way it's being implemented, it is destroying businesses, especially in the suburbs. You find a woman who has started up a business, say of 5 million shillings. She has, maybe she's selling a retail, she has a retail shop somewhere in the suburbs. She has put together maybe 10 to 5 million shillings. Tomorrow, because of the smart city policy, that business is demolished because they think it should not be in the town. It should not be in the city. I think, of course, we are not decampaigning the policy, but the issue is about the timing. The policy can wait. Let us put back the economy to stability, and probably later on, maybe you can implement. I want to stop at that. And once again, I want to thank CSBAG for inviting us to come and contribute to this report. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that comment. I'm sure the team has noted that down. Yes, ma'am. There's a ma'am here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentations, and they were very interesting and very informative. My only reservation is about how we really link budgeting to human capital, because I think that the human capital is very, very critical. Whatever we do, unless we really strengthen our human capital, we are not going to go very far. And in this case, I just want to point out one issue, very, very critical issue. And this is about the health care. The national, for example, the National Health Insurance Scheme. This is an issue that has been debated for the last over 20 years. And Uganda, up to date, does not have a national health insurance scheme. And countries around us mention any Rwanda, Kenya, Burundi, I think even countries like Sudan, I think they have national insurance health scheme, but Uganda has not up to now. I know discussions are going on, but I think it's very important that all of us support the national health insurance scheme. And we all know that most of our families spend about 60% of their income on health care. So however much we talk about all these other issues, unless we really address human capital, maybe we won't go very far. So I would like to ask anybody who really can support the passing and the implementation of the national health scheme to do what they can to push this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. We didn't get your name.
And I work with the White Ribbon Alliance.
Okay.
Yes, which focuses on maternal, newborn, reproductive health.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robina. All right, I'm going to give the last chance to you, then my panel can give their closing remarks and reactions, and then I'll call Francis Odokorach to give us a closing remark. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. My name is Rachel Navasidia. I'm a planner, Policy Research and Innovation, National Planning Authority. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was insightful. First, I want to agree with panelists regarding balancing monetary tightening and other macroeconomic aggregates like economic growth, saving, investment, and capital formation that will really help our economy to revive. Then the other issue is about beyond ensuring coordination of monetary and physical tightening, we also need to protect our country against the external shocks. The government needs to look at other avenues of ensuring that at least the economy is protected. This can be done maybe through increasing fuel storages, investing more in agricultural inputs and infrastructure. With that, we are in position to control the increasing prices in commodities as well as fuel. What is currently happening at NPA, we are performing the midterm review process, of which we are trying to reprioritize the budget, the plan, to align to whatever is happening amidst the COVID-19. So whatever priorities we are trying to pick up will be in position to help in ensuring that at least we recover the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Realigning the budget. Thank you, National Planning Authority. I'm just going to give my panel here, each of you, about 3 minutes to wrap it up, your views and comments, and then we're able to have a concluding remark from Francis Odokorach. Let me start with you, Julius.
Yes, thanks so much. I think for me, really, I'm just taking it in because this is the conversation that helps us when we are in other fora to be able to communicate properly to the public what is happening and what is not happening, and any areas of contention people can be able to understand. Quickly, my colleague from Ministry of Finance will definitely check the anomaly about the model, see whether actually we are communicating well. We never want to make sweeping statements. So, Sophie, you can really take a note of that, and then you can get back to him. But I think for me, there are two important things which mine are actually even questions. I think for me, from finances, one is he mentioned the cushioning, the social safety net. I think it's very critical at this particular moment. I want him, as he comes at the end, to be able to explain how are they doing it, because everything is tightening, but we need to protect the vulnerable, and that's very important. And I think it ties on with what our NPA colleague has said. Where are the fuel reserves? Because I think for me that this is one thing probably would have cushioned us on these fuel prices, and maybe would have not necessitated the Bank of Uganda to increase the CBA rate from 6 to 9%. Maybe by now it would be in 7 and 7.5. I think it's critical that we protect both the people and the economy from the shocks, not only the fuel reserve, but also the food reserves. It's very critical. Food reserves are very, very, very important because they can also stabilize prices. We cannot have our colleagues in Karamoja dying and then there is surplus in another corner of the country. Lastly, I think for me there is something which Wilbur talked about, and I think it's really we need to reflect on it. If I was the one, what would I do? And really, he said very few smart things. What would I do in this particular context? Would I be able to say I'm not doing anything? I'm going to withdraw all the money on me until the situation improves, or I would target those areas where there are better returns? And I think he really said it so well and nicely. And it's an advice to government that we need to put money in these circumstances where we can be able to pick it months. But thank you so much, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Julius. Fuel reserves and food reserves. This is a conversation that we always have every time we're in this crisis. The thing is, we never learn from our past, right? So I don't know whether I should blame, I don't even know if I should blame you, Joel. But we'll get to that. Wilbrod, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's been a good discussion. Let me not repeat. Julius has spoken for me in a way. Three things. I think if there is a key takeaway we want to carry, my colleague said it very well, is our policy frameworks. We just examine them, how, you say Ugandanize. I think there's something, understanding the context in which these policies operate, so that, because the dynamics of our economy are very different from the developed ones. And therefore we should take that into account. And also ensure that one policy does not work against the other one. The tax one being an interesting one. I think poultry was mentioned today. They're trying to encourage poultry to export it and then slap it with. So that's one. The second one, for me, I'm a student of market-driven economies. I want to confess. And therefore, for me, I believe that once there are markets, the chain backward effect will be automatic. If you remember, there was a time in this country, vanilla was a big issue. It's not because people were told, oh, grow vanilla, because there was a market for it. Automatically, people will work to grow it and make it available. And then the interventions government can then do is quality control, yields, but as long as there's a market. For us in banking, when you ask for a loan, the first thing I'm looking for is cash flow to pay it back. In other words, where is the market you're going to sell it to generate cash flow? That's simple. And I think that can drive a lot of things. And therefore, I agree, let's focus on those productive sides of the economy that can supply this market we are talking about. In a nutshell, I'm saying, look at the expenditure discipline to see the areas where we should be spending at this tough time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, you can.
Solomon disappeared. Yeah, thank you, Julius. My parting shot is that for me, the effectiveness of any of these macroeconomic policies is as good as two things. One is the value system and the caliber of the targeted population is one. Number two is the environment in which the policy and the target actually reside. And building on that, I want to give the example that basic research will show you that the advanced economies we admire for having solved a lot of the compliance issues and driving a lot of the population into the middle class. They did achieve that feat by having the most churches and the most pastors and being the most religious. In fact, ironically, there is an inverse relationship between development and level of religiousness, just for the record. So it has nothing to do with being too religious and having too many churches. Where the challenge has been solved is from having a strong environment on 3 levels. One is on the moral angle, in which people have the same view about what is right and wrong. Number 2 is the issue of market response, in which non-compliance or malpractice is shunned and punished by the market. Number 3, and most importantly, is having strong laws and strong enforcement of those laws. It's on those 3 levels that these things have succeeded. And we are far from achieving them. We need to work towards it, and it will not happen without anyone doing something about it. Thank you.
So what Richard is trying to say is, what are you doing about it? Right? Richard, thank you very much. Jimmy, you have so many questions to answer, but also as you give your closing remarks.
Thank you. I have, there was a question on the exchange rate, the shilling losing around 300 to 400 so far. Yeah, I agree with you, and it impacts so many variables, especially imported prices, but also the debt dynamics. So just a small, because we borrow, we have this problem of the original sin, you know. We don't borrow in our own currency. We borrow in foreign currency from the international markets. And so we have to raise funds in local currency, but pay in foreign currency. So exchange rate depreciation feeds strongly to debt dynamics, and that is one of the factors causing increases in debt. That's why when the exchange rate started misbehaving around April, May, Bank of Uganda has to come aggressively to increase rates. The increase in rates leads to, you know, their assets denominated in domestic currency and assets denominated in foreign currency. In other words, by raising the rates, you are trying to raise the price or the returns on assets denominated in domestic currency, so that you can attract more capital into the country. And if you have more capital, the exchange rate is a price, it's a relative price of 2 currencies. And that causes stability in the exchange rate, and that is what the central bank did. And that question really is very relevant, and that is why I would say the central bank started to increase, partly the reason the central bank started to increase the central bank rate. There are 2 other important questions. One is on how far can you keep chasing the imported prices with using monetary policy. There are 2 channels. If I may ask you, if the price of oil increases and Shell wants to import oil, supposing the price of oil was, say, $1, and now it has increased to, say, $2. It means that for the same metric tons or the same unit, you now need to demand for more foreign currency to buy the same unit of oil. And that demand causes pressure in the foreign exchange market and leads to depreciation. And so if the central bank just sits and watches it, definitely it's going to feed into domestic prices, because Shell is a business person. It's going to try to recoup on the price increases by increasing the domestic prices. And if you may recall, before prices started rising in October 2021, slowly, and we were watching. We thought it was supply side, short term, it's not going to be permanent. the only cushion that we had at the time was that the exchange rate was so stable at around 3,500. But supposing the exchange rate was also increasing at the same time, definitely the rate of increases in domestic prices would have been more. And that is how monetary policy affects imported prices. The second channel is the expectation channel. And this is very strong and difficult to measure. When fuel prices started rising, you saw the bus companies, taxis, and many other, the borders, raising prices and everything tied to fuel. We saw transportation prices rise. Actually, what is causing now inflation is transportation prices, and recently school fees. Okay? There are indications that we might jump to 10% from 9% in September, the preliminary number that we are seeing, using the Kampala CPI. And those, the issues now that are driving price increases. And if you saw the chart presented by CSBAG, the senior economist, you saw that oil prices were rising rapidly, but now, for the last 2 months, it has been flat. Okay? But we are seeing, although domestic prices are dropping, we have seen Shell reducing the price to around 5,900. There is some aspect of the exchange rate in that price. But also transportation charges have gone up. And that is now what we call the second round effects of the initial increase in the fuel prices. And that's what the central bank is trying to fight. That is how monetary policy fights imported inflation. I hope I'm clear. If I'm not very clear, I used to teach. I used to be a lecturer. So you can come back and we talk about it bilaterally. The other issue is, what is the appropriate balance between fiscal policy and monetary policy? Our model, the model that we use for forecasting inflation and interest rates and everything, including GDP, had shown that we needed to tighten policy between 1 percentage point to around 2 percentage points in September to increase the rate. By now, it would be at around 10.5 if we had followed the model. Okay? But finance came up and said we are cutting expenditure for Q1 by 4 trillion. That was a good relief for monetary policy. We had to raise rate, the CBR, by just 0.5 percentage point because of what fiscal policy has done. That would have been disastrous if we had raised it up to around 10, 11% by now. The other thing is that you see the exchange rate is depreciating amid this tightening global environment, financing environment, because the US is tightening, the UK, the Eurozone, okay? Other central banks within emerging markets are also tightening, and finance is flowing back to where they came from, okay? But that just decrease in expenditure would have cost if the fiscal was not to cut expenditure, the demand for imports would have been so strong, and that would have driven more depreciation pressures, okay? And that move alone, and would have had more deteriorating current account deficit. But that move alone to cut expenditure helped on that front, and also fighting inflation. And so there is that balance is very important. Mr. Tugume, I have listened to you on 2 occasions. This is the second one. And your concern is that the model that we use were designed for well-functioning markets. I agree with you. I agree with you. But if you cascade this model to developing countries like Uganda, and then ask yourself, why is it? Because what you are saying is that the structure, the production, sorry about it. what you are saying is that the production structure or the production function for advanced economies is not what is in Uganda. You know, you talked about the factors of production, labor capital, entrepreneurship, and land. Land is in fixed supply, so you can't do much with land. Then you have capital and labor. And then what you call entrepreneurship, I know you went further than Econ 101, it's called total factor productivity, okay? And the issues of dishonesty, the issue of people borrowing and failing to pay is some sort of regulatory failure, which is expected in markets. Markets are always, they are market failures. And so you need a regulator to correct those failures. And that is what I term regulatory failures. And that is where the government should come through maybe the legal system to address it. For instance, right now, one of the reasons that we give for the high lending rates is because the contract enforcement is so weak. You have borrowed funds, time for paying you don't want to pay, and then the bank wants to recover their funds from you because you are defaulting using the right procedure. And then you run to a court and get an injunction. As we talk now, the amount of money locked in court injunctions just because of defaults is about 7 trillion. And that is where there is a regulatory failure. All those market failures that you are talking about that these models don't address are issues to do with regulatory failures. The issue of the informal sector, that is a regulatory failure. And if government could work out a way of addressing these issues, the model that we use would work perfectly. I should be concluding, but I see that, you know, there is what we call the time inconsistent problem in macroeconomics. That because you have to spend more, it's very popular. The politicians will tell you, I have the road A, B, C, D in my constituency. You should spend on these roads. You should spend on schools, spend. But the short-term gains lead to long-term losses. And that is what we call time inconsistency problem in most developing countries. And I want to caution you to minimize the time inconsistency problem. I see it's also coming from the sister agencies of government, and it's going to be bad. There are many questions, but I think I will just want to thank CSBAG for giving us this opportunity to come and explain ourselves. I like the scrutiny that you are now giving to the government agencies. In Bank of Uganda, we take it as an opportunity to come out from our air-conditioned rooms to town halls and explain ourselves. We have been in different parts of the country trying to demystify what this thing called monetary policy is. We have been in Karamoja, we have been in Kabale, we have been in Kabarole, many parts of the country. We have now increased our presence on radios, on TVs, and we love this scrutiny that because if you are asking difficult questions, then it helps us to also take responsible policy decisions. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jimmy Apa, for your submissions. Joel, you have the last say at this, and then we will invite Francis Odokorachi, who is the country director of Oxfam, to give us his closing remarks. Can we have the microphone to Joel, please? Okay, you can use that, no problem.
Thank you again. I'm the last to speak, and this water is down, but still, I'll try to say something. First of all, I want to answer your question. This financial year, we allocated about 628 billion towards the climate change initiatives, which include the restoring of the wetlands and also increasing the forest cover, as well as gazetting it. But you also have to be mindful that in other programs such as agriculture, we also allocated money for irrigation, which also hits to that same point. I think on the issue of this, just pick a few questions here. Issue on the smart city, I think CSBAG will have to take this up with the local government. I don't think I can able to speak on that one. For the issues on security, yes, that's true. We can't hide. It's when economic situations are dire, it forces people into things which maybe probably they would not have done, or some other groups take advantage of these issues. But as you can see in the budget for this financial year, close to 4 trillion was provided to the security agencies to improve the security infrastructure. And we are hoping that our colleagues and counterparts in the security sectors are taking note of this increasing crime, and maybe we'll be able to provide a response on that. As regards social protection, and also as well as human capital development, this budget alone, over close to 8 trillion was allocated to the health and education sector. We have the SAGE programs running, as well as the PDM and the other programs that are meant to help alleviate poverty and put income into people's pockets. So, in conclusion, I think what's clear and what the Ministry of Finance, the message has been put out there, is that we need to fight this cancer, that is the inflation, and we need to fight it decisively to ensure that these second round effects don't persist into inflation levels that we cannot control. As such, the government will continue to support monetary policy to this effect. Nonetheless, Q2 will show a better positive picture on spending, especially in the areas that will increase the productive capacity of the economy, and also the areas of social protection. But we might see some money coming on the development side to alleviate on some of the questions that have been coming up. I would also like to thank CSBAG for putting this together and inviting us to answer some of these critical questions on the economy and on the situation that is happening globally. And to that I say thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. Joel Mulinda, Principal Economist, Macroeconomic Policy Department at the Ministry of Finance. Thank you so much for your time. Jimmy Apa, Acting ED Research and Policy, Bank of Uganda. Thank you very much for being part of the discussion. Richard Tugume, Board Member in charge of Innovation and Research at the Uganda Agribusiness Alliance. Thank you very much for taking off time to also speak about those issues we always fear to talk about. And we have to incorporate that into the factors of production. I think I leave that away. I leave away with what you said. And I think that Jimmy talked about failure to regulatory failures, which we need to take very seriously. Thank you, Richard, for being part of the conversation here. Will Brodowar, thank you very much. Executive Director, Uganda Bankers Association, really focusing on where do we go from here. And of course, Julius Mukunda from CSBAG. Thank you very much, Julius. A round of applause to my panel. Kindly please go and take your seats. Thank you. It's now my honor to invite Francis Odokorach, who is the country director of Oxfam, to come and give us our closing remarks. And a special thank you. Can we give Oxfam a round of applause? They've been very great partners. Thank you for making this conversation possible.
thank you so much, my brother Solomon from another part of this country, for very good moderation of this discussion. I would like to invite people to give you a fantastic round of applause. We know you for your investigative journalism. And when you were asking questions about Imyoga, that is something that you ably educated us about, and how effective and how it was yet to be effective, if I may say that. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my deepest appreciation to all the panelists who have today demonstrated to us what many of us feared when we were at high schools. Because when it comes to economics, some people would rather study history. But I think today you have demystified it and made it much easier for some of us who are part of the Wananchi. So I really want to extend my deepest appreciation. My name is Francis Odokorach. Many of you who knows the Luos, and then you understand the Rach means bad. But that's not my problem. It was given to me, I think they were trying to communicate something that was happening in the context, and I'll talk about that later. I want to also extend deepest appreciation to all the people who have taken time to come and have this very honest and frank and insightful conversation. So thank you so much for coming. I want to thank my brother Julius and the colleagues from CSBAG. Yeah, we know you, that you're quite rooted in your work. You work in various contexts. You are in the grassroots. You are at the national level, bringing all the people who are shaping and making Uganda's decisions, especially around the broad policies that allow us to enjoy this country, so that we can also engage and take part in some of these important subjects, such as the fiscal and monetary policies in Uganda. I have ably learned a lot listening, although I came a little late, but I learned a lot from the panelists. I learned today that indeed, whatever we do around the monetary and fiscal policy is to ensure that everything is basically anchored around managing inflation, as well as ensuring price stability. So I have learned that. And I also learned that whereas fiscal policies promote macroeconomic stability by sustaining aggregate demand and private sector incomes during an economic downturn, that I know many of us have experienced it and still continue to do experience, by moderating economic activities during this period to ensure some strong growth. I know that Uganda, we are struggling, just like many countries. However, the effectiveness of these policies is definitely dependent on how well they are targeted to address the underlying causes of the economic challenges. I learned that today. I've also learned that some of the issues that we are experiencing today is really imported from somewhere. And many of us will rush to mention some of the names of the capital cities in Ukraine and in Russia, and we will blame it on that. But we have also learned that some of these issues could have actually been managed better had we done some of the things that we needed to do better in time, so that we are able to cope with those demands and the pressure that would be brought upon by the imported factors that are driving the inflation. I was really encouraged about the submissions that the panelists gave us today. I was encouraged particularly because you all talked very passionately about ensuring that we strike the right balance between how we implement our fiscal and monetary policies, without forgetting the people that are most impacted by some of these policies. It is very easy to forget that when the inflationary pressures is exerted on the population, not everybody experiences it the same way. We all experience it differently, and we need to be alive to that fact. We rush quite too often to say, you know, the guys in the village will experience it most. Sometimes you might be wrong. I heard one of the generals who went to the bush said while the other colleagues left the bush and went into the cities, he remained in the bush. And probably he's doing better. So you can't assume that all the people who are in the rural areas are doing badly. In the same way, you cannot assume that all the people who are in the urban areas or in the growing cities are doing well. And you can't assume that the young people are experiencing it the same way. I looked at the composition of the gentlemen who are seated in front of us, helping us to demystify the fiscal and the monetary policy, and I did not see any of our sisters or mothers standing right there. That perhaps demonstrates on how far we still have to go to fight the several aspects of inequalities that exist amidst us. Why is it that only the gentlemen were standing up there? They were there because of their positions, if I am not wrong. How did they get there? Why were there no ladies standing there to speak on the particular issues that do affect women differently? I was encouraged by my mother who was seated close to me. Constantly, I was glad that, she raised it in the end and said the aspects of human development was not being mentioned very clearly by the panelists. But I'm glad that you did mention it. And perhaps you were speaking from your own experience, but from the experience of others, simply because you live that experience, you see it in a way that we gentlemen don't. And if you see majority of the people who benefit from the healthcare services in the country, if I am not wrong, for us gentlemen, sometimes we go and sanitize in the evening bars. Glad His Excellency says it will remain open, and then do other things, while the mothers will have to rush and take our children to the hospital. I am speaking in this perspective because for us as Oxfam in Uganda, we believe that a stable and predictable economic environment contributes substantially to social and economic welfare of the population. And that's why we do exist, whether in the context of the refugee response or whether there is a context of a disaster like those that we are experiencing in Bale, or whether those that we are experiencing in Karamoja, or those in Rwenzori area, but also in the urban settlements where we see that there is growing inequalities of different forms. Ladies and gentlemen, I know for sure that we should be coming to the end of this conversation, but allow me to address all of us on the aspects of the survival of this planet. Very soon, we are going to have the Conference of Parties sitting here in Africa, in Egypt, where they will be talking about the issues of climate change. I know the social media and everywhere is awash with the debates about how we are contributing less to the issues that are constantly pushing us to the brink of extinction. Let us not forget that even when we talk about the macroeconomic policies, when we talk about many other different policies that we have in this country, if only the world is honest. And I want to speak to the debate that was raging on the panel here between Bwana Jimmy and my brother Richard, where Richard was today introducing the fifth factor of production called dishonesty. Richard, allow me to quote you on this matter and address to all of us that if we as a human race do not wake up to be honest and also hold ourselves to account and accept to be held to account when we are going wrong in terms of our decisions, this planet, even all these policies that we are going to fight for it so hardly, it's not going to heal what we want for the generation that will come after us. So in whatever capacity that you are, let us not forget to continue to push the powers that be outside and in this country so that we can continue to meet the commitment that we have put to ensure that we can save this planet from all the factors of climate change and others. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to also comment on the issues of contexts. Indeed, the fiscal and the monetary policies do not operate in a vacuum. They operate in a context. And today, as I stand here to close this conversation, I am reminded by the context that we operate in as civil societies in Uganda, and allow me to speak without any fear, that indeed, if the government of Uganda continues to ensure that we have a good operating context, and as I was ably encouraged by the submission by the different colleagues from the government ministries, including Bank of Uganda, Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, and also the banking sectors, that indeed the conversation we have had today was insightful and helpful to this country, then we should not also be shy when the civil societies do scrutinize us in other aspects that entails the context of Uganda. The governance of any country is important, and good governance is particularly important, and the participation of the citizenry to the governance system in a country is important. So when the civil societies ask questions around governance, please allow us to ask, because I am also a Ugandan like you, but I only work for an international organization. That sometimes I seriously disagree with their positions, and I do stand by that. But when the people in my government, when you are employed in the government, and you are in a way going to impact on my people, impact on ourselves, and we scrutinize your decisions, allow us to do that, because that is why we exist. Don't label us, and don't give us some of the narratives that are very misleading, such that does not describe who we are. So accept me with that to submit, and continue to appreciate all of you. I was reminded that as I conclude, I should really extend our deepest appreciation to our colleagues from Bank of Uganda. You have done a fantastic job. I think you stood against the tides of the pressures on whether you are making the right decision or not. Comparing what the other countries are doing, you stood your ground, and today you are able to demystify and explain to us. Some of us do not understand it. I only understand when I see the exchange rates are going up. I only understand when I go to the market to buy some food to support my family, and the same amount that I used last week, I can no longer use to get the same amount, and yet my children are growing up and they're eating more. We also learned from you, our friends from the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, a lot. We learned that indeed you're doing research, you are not making decisions out of the blue, and in fact you are responding to the issues that are very particular. But we are also reminding you that indeed it is important that you continue to monitor whether the releases that you're making is going in the right way. You also reminded us indeed that it is not only your job and responsibility, but all of us to ensure that we are able to track and monitor how the government resources are being used. Our colleague from the Bankers Association, thank you so much. Many times we think you're out there to make the most of profits out of us. Little did we also know that indeed you do care about us as human race. So we will continue to appreciate and partner with you in the private sector, because without you, the economy cannot work. Without you, the people who can access the resources that you provide may not access, especially the women. So thank you so much for coming out to explain how you contribute to this economy. We are also encouraged by our colleague, and I've already mentioned it earlier on, Richard. Thank you so much for bringing a real human perspective to the debate on the fiscal and the monetary policy. Thank you so much. And to you, Richard, and the team for really allowing us to have this discussion. I thank you so much for listening, and with this, allow me to close this function. Over to you, Solomon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. If I was still on TV, I would really get scared, because you would take my job so easily. Francis Odokorach, Country Director of Oxfam, thank you very much for your closing remarks and for the encouragement. I just wanted to make one comment to Joel. I am going to follow that money, 628 billion shillings for climate change. I am going to follow it to the letter and see what you use that money for. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. All right. Julius, you want to say something? I saw you touching your... Okay. May I invite my panel and Francis to come, and we have a group picture at least. I also want to say that I'll be hosting a Twitter space on Monday. So, Joel, I may need to get someone from the Ministry of Finance, either you or I could get the PSST to come for the Twitter space. It's going to be big, so I would encourage you to all join so that we really extend this conversation. The Twitter space goes off at 6 p.m. on Monday evening, so make a date with me on my Twitter handle for that space. Yes. Julius, you wanna come down, or you gonna stay up? I'm excited. Okay. But this picture would be incomplete without a lady. Mama, can you please, Mama, can you, from the Red Ribbon Alliance, come and join this picture? Really, I will really be crucified if you're not there. And Carol and Sophie, please come and join. Copies of today's report are available. I've also been asked if the presentation that was made by Sophie, the senior economist from CSBAG, will be available for you to be a point of reference. I hope you left your emails on the registration table. We should be able to send you a copy of that on your emails if you left your email. Otherwise, the report, you'll get, each of you can go out with a copy of that report as we go on. Thank you for coming. I wish you a very lovely day ahead of you. My name is Solomon Serwanya, and it's really been an absolute honor hosting this conversation. Good morning. Clap for me.
Recording.